Money never sleeps, pal.
Hey there, this is Pete Townsend from Norio Ventures, and welcome to Money Never Sleeps, a podcast that looks inside the head of entrepreneurs and at the crossover of startups, enterprise, finance, technology, and life as we know it. This episode of Money Never Sleeps is kindly sponsored by Ireland's fintech and financial services recruitment specialist, Top Tier Recruitment. If you or a colleague need help attracting and retaining great talent for your fintech or financial services company, it is highly advisable that you build a relationship with a team at Top Tier Recruitment. You can find them at toptierrecruitment.com and tell them we sent you. This week, we talked to Jill Richmond, co-founder and chief revenue officer at Jewel, a proposed Bermudian bank and technology firm building banking infrastructure for digital assets. So, why don't we just jump right into it with a chat with Jill on this week's episode of Money Never Sleeps.
Money never sleeps, pal.
Here we go again. Welcome to Money Never Sleeps. We're recording today from the home studio, and I'm on with Jill Richmond, co-founder and chief revenue officer at Jewel. Welcome to the show, Jill.
Thank you, Pete.
Great to have you on. So Derek Deemer, and I've never actually said his second name. I think it is Deemer, from Regiment, introduced us after he and I connected on a Diffuse Conzoom virtual networking session. And he and I had a follow-up chat after that, and he and I got to talking about my time in Bermuda. And he said, "Oh, you were in Bermuda. You got to talk to Jill Richmond. The business she's with, Jewel, have their HQ in Bermuda. And here we are. And now, just obviously for our listeners' sake, you and I have had a few chats since then. This is our first go round. But it's amazing how these circles get connected and how small this space is and how everybody's relationships just overlap. It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I love is our connection to Derek Deemer at Regiment is actually through one of our early investors. And so circles are very small. It's a very tight ecosystem.
Absolutely. I know. All right. Well, let's just get right to it. Very curious about your backstory. Obviously, you and I have talked a bit about that already, but just kind of if you can bring all of us from a listener standpoint up to date with how you got to this point in what you're doing. Yeah.
So I come to the table with a strong policy background. I started my career on Capitol Hill working for Senator Lautenberg. And then gradually moved over to two different times in my career working over at the World Bank. So I worked at the World Bank and their governance, I worked at WBI, the World Bank Institute, and their governance team. And then moved over to the World Bank Institute again a little bit later and worked for their innovation practice group, where I focused on their open data initiative, something called Development Marketplace, which was a legacy program, heavily focused on social entrepreneurs and investment into social entrepreneurs and helping to take a lot of those, that existing program and almost decentralize it and put it back into country manager hands, where we were creating follow-on funding mechanisms for those social impact investors in countries like Egypt and India, and East Africa, in Kenya. And then moved two different times in my career. I built two different tech companies that were ultimately, I would say they were ultimately restaurant tech, but still solving a lot of the payment issues for small businesses and customers. And then around 2015, towards the end of 2015, close to 2016, took a very particular interest in distributed ledger technology, blockchain, and specifically working with a number of consensus-based companies. Yep. And fast forward, in 2018, I started or founded an organization called DATA, the Digital Asset Trade Association. Yep. It was a trade group. And we focused our attention, almost zeroed in on the state of Wyoming and Colorado and helping to pass and support it. A lot of enabling legislation right now, including the SPEEDY, which is Special Purpose Banking Bill, for which we are starting to see companies that are coming in, and including Caitlin Long, who are applying for that license. And at the same time and simultaneously met my existing team. And therein sit really, because the genesis story of Jewel starts with my team who had previously gone through the process of applying for licenses working with the OCC in the US, and very much zeroed in on Bermuda as an appropriate destination, both in terms of applying for a banking license and a DABA license. And I can tell you a little bit about that inception story, but met team that were behind that effort and said, there was an opportunity.
Okay.
And there's an opportunity for a de novo bank and a de novo banking effort in the right jurisdiction. And Bermuda, in so many ways, kind of was at the intersection.
Okay. I didn't know, you mentioned it a few seconds ago, actually, Wyoming, right? I didn't know that you had a hand in that, as they say in Ocean's 11, right? And Bob Cornish, I'm sure you're familiar with Bob. Bob was just ringing me. I'm not sure why. In the last half hour, he and I are on a board together, and I see Bob Cornish popping up on my phone. Very, very serendipitous. About to talk to Jill Richmond. Didn't even know that you were involved in Wyoming, which is pretty cool. That's funny. So for our listeners out there, Bob Cornish was one of the lawyers who had worked significantly on developing the regime in Wyoming for digital assets, right? Is that correct, Jill, in a nutshell?
Yeah, and certainly tell him that we were on this.
Yeah, I absolutely will. And so that Wyoming, because I've been to Wyoming, just to Jackson Hole, what was it, 2 years ago, looks a little bit different than Bermuda, right? And as most folks know out there as well, I've spent quite a lot of time in Bermuda. So can you talk about what Jewel is, right? Why Bermuda, the digital asset business license there, and how this all came about?
Yeah, so Bermuda has a near pristine kind of, regulatory, as far as we're concerned, regulatory history, and a history of really being, a financial services industry mecca, including kind of the insurance and reinsurance industry. The Premier took a very active role, Premier Burt took a very active role in creating kind of clarity and enabling legislation in the form of DABA, the Digital Asset Business Act, for issuers, and made amendments to their banking license. And so and have started to attract a number of exchanges and otherwise over the past so this is in 2018 where a lot of this legislation was passed, have started to attract a number of those companies that are now operationalizing on island, that are applying for the DABA license, that are getting approved through the DABA license. And one of the things that, frankly speaking, was really not available and still isn't available is there are 4 legacy banks on island. None of them will really touch this industry. So one of the enabling pieces is a bank, and a bank that is ostensibly chartered to work with, provide traditional banking services and technology that is basically supporting and growing with the industry, both on the settlement side. And so we as a team came together and have been going through the process of applying for a full banking license, not a limited license, which will provide us kind of the broad remit of banking this industry traditionally, and then kind of building on those services that are supportive of the industry on, somewhat legacy and not legacy rails.
Okay. That makes sense. You've talked about pulling the team together. You personally had your awakening a few years ago, as we've talked about, in terms of distributed ledger technology, blockchain, cryptocurrency, digital assets. Through the course of the next few years with data, with a number of different initiatives, and getting into this space, meeting your co-founders, and then, okay, let's do this. What was the real what was the real crux of it that you said, okay, we're doing this?
I mean, it's a combination of things, right? So, if you look at the breakout of the team, Chance Barnett, who is our interim CEO and chairman, was really kind of the first person who saw the opportunity in Bermuda. And then there were a lot of all of us individually that were sort of circling around Bermuda as an opportunity. So Chance and Michael Dowling, our CTO, had been behind a separate effort of applying for, of working with the OCC for a license. Adam Dean, who joins us as COO, was at Silicon Valley Bank previously, also was looking at Bermuda as an opportunity. And our CFO, Ning Chung, who also was at Silicon Valley Bank, behind Adam in their asset management arm, we all came together. And I think the realization happened for Chance earlier. I joined him very shortly after that decision was made as one of the first employees and co-founders with Michael Dowling and Adam Dean. I think the realization happened super early on around kind of the passing of legislation. And I think we all really started to brace ourselves for the amount of time it might take through the licensing process. So seeing the opportunity is one thing, realizing that we have to work with regulators through a process they haven't done in 50 years is another.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And, testing new regulation at the same time, right? It's a big undertaking. So Jewel is, in effect, a digital bank, right? Where your customers will be those that need banking services that are taking advantage of the digital asset licensing regime in Bermuda, but also then attracting customers from other places as well. And I'd say that, the whole OCC thing, obviously Bermuda is a crown colony of the United Kingdom. We still remember that. But its closeness to the United States of America, I think it's 600 miles off the coast of South Carolina. And the United States with the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, with the acting director being Brian Brooks, who is a former Coinbase chief legal officer. And there have been some very supportive pronouncements that have come out of that office in the last number of months. And that is creating quite a wave of opportunity for folks like you guys. And there's a lot ahead of you to capture, to ride that wave properly, right?
There is. I mean, and we see all of this as exceptionally positive, right? So, we as a digital asset friendly bank will be providing custodial services. And to the extent that we have identified our primary partner on the custody side is Anchorage. And, frankly speaking, we think that we have a bit of a leg up in that process, right? We're watching kind of the maturation of the market. We're also watching the maturation of the market in the US with some clarity. And so that we feel like we're in a prime position to some extent.
Absolutely. This whole space, the whole digital asset space, is gathering momentum so quickly, right? And, we just talked about the OCC, we talked about what you guys are doing, and it seems to move in dog years, right? Compared to the rest of the world, right? Every 2 years of development and of maturation is really like that of 14 years of any other industry, just because of how quickly it's moving and how the technology frameworks are so adaptable. How do you keep pace with everything that's going on? Because I feel like it's flying at me at a mile a minute.
It's hard to be old operating in this space.
Yeah.
We'll say that much.
I know.
I think there's a few things. I think that, so there's the separation of like a bit of church and state here, which is operating as an entrepreneur in this space and operating as an entrepreneur in this space with the amount of agility you have to have, right? So to the extent that I think we have to be core to what we're building. And so as the information evolves and the market matures, I think we as a company still pay very close attention to what is the core problem that we're solving and how quickly can we build it. We have an opportunity, right? We're not a legacy bank, right? So the fact that we are able to build and pivot really, really quickly, right? So through this, I'll give you an example. So, through this process, I think on our roadmap, as we were sort of starting to determine what our go-to-market looks like, I don't know that we had originally determined that our first priority was going to be crypto collateralized lending. And we very quickly, and have been able to do that as we're going through the licensing process, said we're going to make this a priority and go ahead and try and get regulatory approval through that. So I guess that's the product roadmap decision making as keeping pace with that. It's also the how do we keep pace with the level of information that comes at us, and I think it's this kind of is this still, are the problems that we are solving in this industry problems that are immediate and problems that are priority, and the rapid kind of prioritization of those things, they're still there, right? Because even though the industry is changing, the regulatory environment isn't moving as quickly.
Yeah, I'm with you. And it's really hard to keep kind of that pyramid really of priorities, right? Even a reverse pyramid sometimes. And these 4 or 5 things you need to do, but then you've got these winds of change coming at you from a number of different directions. Which things should get slotted in as priorities, and which things just remain on the sidelines in your backlog of things to do, right? I think it really depends on your stage as a company. I was exchanging emails with one of my favorite Irish startups here this morning, who I hadn't heard from in a few months, and he is a listener and he knows who he is, and he has this thing about coin flipping. And I'll leave it at that because he didn't want me to talk about exactly what it was that he was doing yet, because it's still under wraps. It's a bit stealth. Anyway, during the pandemic, when it was like, geez, how are we going to actually bring revenue in? I mean, the pandemic's still going on, but I mean, the real challenge that you see a lot of these, self-help startup books or self-help startup blogs saying right now is find some way to bring in revenue and respond to what's going on in the market. I think they actually picked apart maybe 10 to 20% of their overall product. That was something very unique that they did well. And they sold it to somebody. They didn't sell it, they didn't dispose of that part of their product, but they actually brought a client in to use that product in something they didn't expect they'd be selling at all, right? Just because of that push to get revenue in right now. And it's like, yeah, adapting to collateralized cryptocurrency lending and being able to do that is just a real indicator of how quickly things are moving and how you have to be able to respond to that. It's mind-boggling. Last night, Owen Fitzgerald, who was my co-host, he and I recorded what was our 100th episode. And we did a deep dive into the challenger banks in the UK, Monzo, Starling, and Revolut, because there's been a lot of noise out there in the market over the last 2 weeks about what they're doing and their financial results. And pulling out my old banking hat from the old days and just thinking about some of these things, those decisions that were made over 18 months to 2 years now are being made in 18 minutes to 2 hours. It's a massive change, and it's a huge amount of respect to folks like you and your team, Jill, that are actually on this journey to get a live product to market in this environment, which is amazing. Switching tact a bit, looking back at your background at the University of Cape Town, which is quite interesting, University of Oxford, the University of London, and specifically with what you did around African studies in general. And then, like you said, working in DC, all of those experiences, I think, must have shaped your modus operandi quite a bit, right? Can you talk a little bit about that very unique piece of your background, and how that has impacted how you carry yourself professionally, perhaps and personally as well?
I mean, I think, from the outset, it was always a policy first process. I think I recognized the importance of building something somewhat disruptive and innovative. It has to be led with policy first to some extent. Yeah. And so I would say my MO was, at least in saying, look, if we're entering a very regulated space as a bank, focusing on the regulatory clarity, not the other way around, was maybe the only through line. I mean, I could tell a very, windy story, but I feel like that is the big kind of like, Ray Dalio's principle through line. Like, does that make any sense?
It makes complete sense, and it's scary how much sense it makes, Jill. I've got chills going down my spine because it makes sense. So I think your field of work back in the day was really around refugee programs?
Yes.
Yeah. And I understand clearly that with something like that, you do need policy. You can't just go around willy-nilly running such a program. It needs to be based upon a particular set of rules. There is an extreme parallel to that and getting into a new type of banking, right? Which is quite interesting to draw that analogy there. And I was talking with somebody about this yesterday, in that being able to look at a piece of policy, a piece of regulation, and say, how am I going to form the best possible business model around that actually enables me to make use of my own, technological expertise, my own secret sauce, but in such a way that is also regulatorily compliant? That is a massive thing to do, right? And that's clearly an advantage if you can. I'm going to think of some type of reg ops, DevOps, sales ops type of word for it, right? But there's something there that can definitely be a differentiator and a secret sauce for a business when you can actually.
I mean, we saw it a little bit, right, in the 2017, ICO kind of frothy bubble, right? And it was like, we'd love to think that innovation comes first, but innovation doesn't come first. Unfortunately, some kind of regulatory clarity, policy framework comes first. I think that's, if I can take any kind of analog or through line from my background, which is somewhat adjacent, that probably is it.
I get it. Makes a heck of a lot of sense. Tell me, very specific question. What was your very first memory of solving a problem?
Okay. I mean, it's not, I probably wouldn't say it's my very first memory, but I think you'll probably appreciate this from like the hustler perspective. I think age 10 or 11, or maybe it was about 10, I had gone out and made a big ticket item purchase, by the way, with my money, for something that a 10-year-old probably shouldn't have. And my parents decided that they were, even though it was my money, they thought that I really needed to understand the value of money and time, and confiscated this item. I mean, I think it literally was makeup. So my parents said, we're going to take this from you until you figure out a way to earn it back again.
Right.
Again, my money.
Of course.
So I remember turning to my father and saying, like, all right, fine, can you drive me to some hippy dippy crystal store? Because I remember like these crystals becoming these necklaces becoming incredibly popular. And I was like, Dad, do you have a soldering iron? And I went out and bought a bunch of crystals and like these necklaces. And I found the most popular girl in my school to buy it.
Okay. Awesome.
I was like, who's the influencer in this group? All right, if she has it, like everyone else will want it. I think I sold them for like $10 or $15. Anyway.
Did that make the money back?
I think with a multiple of like 20.
Awesome.
Yeah.
An entrepreneur already with 20x returns, that's a real good sign.
It's not a bad sign.
Awesome, Jill. What do you, obviously that's a key personality trait of an entrepreneur that is helpful. And that was my next question, right? What do you think are some of your other personality traits besides achieving a 20x return at the age of 11 that have been helpful to you in your endeavors as an entrepreneur?
Find the influencer.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think the personality traits are on the softer side. I have legacy relationships that I nurture as long as I possibly can. And I'm not transactional about them. And, those are the relationships that have been critical in, I think, every endeavor I've ever undertaken, right? Which is, there's that like the Adam Grant philosophy of give, take, right? Which is the like, sure that those relationships are, that you're giving as much as you possibly can, and that this is not transactional in nature. Yeah. Because, when it comes to starting a new endeavor, those are your early investors. Those relationships are so key. Those are your early customers. Those are your early partners. Oh, and by the way, like if your investors happen to be your early customers, like even better, So there's something in that, I think, which is probably at my strength. And I don't know that I even acknowledge, I don't know that I even realize it because I do it I do it almost by default. Yeah. But I think that's probably plays to my strength.
I get that. And you're challenging me here because I'm really thinking about that. Because even obviously outside the Money Never Sleeps podcast, do talk to a lot of people. And I'd say, just off the top of my head, 25 people say in the past few months that I've spoken with that I may have been introduced to for the first time, or those that I might have met in the last year that I was having a second or third conversation with. How do you keep track of all that, right? And that, you're going to meet a lot of people. And is it just a natural, hey, we vibed, we connected, let's talk again in a couple of months, right? Do you just keep keep that wave turning over, or is it just, how does it all work for you?
I mean, I do. I think, of course, we all meet a lot of people, but in many ways, I actually put it in my calendar.
Yeah.
I commit to the idea. If I say, look, there's nothing really on the table for us right now, let's share a few, I'll share a bit of research as I'm doing it, and I send it over, and I do it quite genuinely. And then every, month or so, I have it on the calendar that I should follow up with someone that I've met, and I know what they're, the area that they're focusing on that they'd be curious about.
Yeah, I get it. You just gave me an idea. I was talking at an R3 webinar a couple weeks ago on using the video medium to your advantage. And I said something to the effect of, plaster these note cards up on the wall behind you when you're talking to an investor, because you're not meeting with them in person. They don't see you flipping through a notepad looking for your notes on what to say. You can just put all these little cues up on the wall behind you, because what can I put up on the wall behind me that I'm looking at right now, or the wall in front of me I'm looking at right now? I could put up one of those like CSI style, maps of people and connectivity, and just put their pictures up on the wall and just keep that as a fresh reminder. Yes, scheduling in your calendar is probably the most effective thing to do, right? And probably the easiest thing to do, but I like to make things difficult for myself and more creative.
No, I mean, it's usually like if I get off a phone call with someone, I typically am like, I literally say, hey, look, I'm going to follow up with you in the next month. And I put it in the calendar, and then I don't have to think about it. And I have a reminder that like hits me a few days early.
That's easy to do. And I've been using HubSpot more recently for that, which is quite effective, and set the follow-ups, which helps. What do you think you need to work on as an entrepreneur?
I'm a data person, right? And so I have to work a lot on the nature of the stories that I'm able to convey through that data, and the excitement that needs to convey. It's an attractive quality as an entrepreneur to be extremely excited and to convey that. I know that is not my strength.
Okay.
I've been told that many times. And I think there's a level of comfort in being able to sort of tell a really good story through your company's journey. It's compelling. And I know that is the thing that needs to be worked on most.
Okay. It's hard to do. You've done a lot of writing in your day, though, haven't you?
Yes.
And is there an element of storytelling in your writing?
There is a level of fact in my writing and less an element of storytelling.
Okay. It's extremely hard to do. I've been working with a startup recently, very, very early stage, on getting their investor story right. And I was on a Zoom with them yesterday, and I'm like, thinking really hard. And I've got my head in my hands and trying to knock on my head to get this one element of the story just right. It is so hard to do. And we were following the Y Combinator model for the pitch deck, and that story. And when it's a B2B2C company, it's sometimes really, really hard to get that story right, where you map in the journey of the C, the customer at the end of the channel, right, as well as the B, who's paying you as a startup. Hard to do, but I think that story is another story for another day, right? What do you see is the next hurdle for you and for Jewel to get over?
So, to give you an idea, we are in the finalization of our provisional license. We have submitted, I would say, the majority of our application in an extremely iterative way with the regulators. And the next hurdle, I think, is in getting to the finalization of that application. So we envisage that we're going to get, 80 to 120 questions back from regulators within the next week around our application. I hate to get super tactical, but we are all hands on deck And we can, we know that the clock is at midnight. And so this is the thing we've been working on for 16 to 18 months. And so.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My good friends at Archax, Graham Rodford, they just got their FCA authorization the other day, and that's been 2 years, right? I first started talking to them in August of 2018 and started talking about fundraising with them at that point in time. And it was always part of the story around fundraising that regulation was a key part of the business, and that's what needed to happen first, right? And it was going to be a long journey, and it's never easy. It's never easy. Cool. All right. Well, I think we got a good picture of you, a good picture of Jewel, and how it all fits together. One of our favorite questions that we like to ask on this podcast, that when Owen and I were recording episode 100 last night, he said we should peel out because we didn't do this on all the episodes, but we should peel out all the questions that we asked of this next question and final question and combine it together into a bit of an anthology, which we may still do, and ask our excellent producer, Conan Brophy, to undertake that little task. But the question is, what is one thing that people wouldn't expect to know about you, Jill?
One thing that people wouldn't expect to know about me. I'm pretty brazen. I spent, and I don't know that, this would have been 20 years ago, but I spent, at least 6 months by myself, alone, backpacking through Southern and Eastern Africa.
Wow.
Yeah, alone. And I don't know that people would expect that I would have, I would have had either the tenacity or the brazenness, or maybe a little bit of the foolishness to have done that alone, at least today. And I don't know that they would have expected me to have been so brazen to have done that, especially given the time that I did that, which is around 2000, 2001.
Okay.
Which was, through Zimbabwe, all the way up through Tanzania, Kenya, alone.
That's amazing.
Also, sometimes hitchhiking. So I really shouldn't even say that out loud, but I did. I don't even think my family know that. But
well, they do now.
Fine.
Wow. My wife and I did our honeymoon in Kenya, probably 6 years on from when you were there with your brazen ways. And I couldn't imagine, not having the wonderful support of, I think the guy's name was Ishmael, who was driving us around in 4-wheel drive VW bus, right? And at basically what was, less than 10 miles an hour going over the bumpy roads. So yeah, cheers to that, Jill. Amazing. I'm sure there are a lot more stories out of that snippet that hopefully will come to light in our next conversation. Absolutely. When it's allowed, finally. All right. Well, Jill, this has been a fascinating conversation. Having spoken with you a couple of times, I didn't even expect we'd get to this level. So thank you. It's been a real pleasure. And I know that we'll talk again soon.
I have to say, we've had, this might have been the one thing that has been, an ongoing joke, because something happens every time we go to tape, and it's. I know. And just for our listeners' sake, for the first 2 times that we were going to record this one, Jill had an emergency came up that took priority from a business perspective, which does happen, and we're totally forgiving of that. But then this morning, Jill, you had another little emergency, but you've climbed over brick walls to make sure you got this one done, didn't you? Yeah. I woke up this morning and my car was completely broken into. So I was, and I said, there is absolutely no way I am changing the time and or date for this recording, because I am determined to have it. So
awesome. I'm so appreciative of the fact that you hung in there, even though your weights, your tennis rackets, and your workout gear is all gone now.
It works.
But like we said, it's better than the whole car being gone.
It's better than the whole car being gone.
Look on the bright side of life, as Monty Python says. Yeah. Well, Jill, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. That does it for this week, folks. And thanks to Jill for opening up her mind to help us figure out why she does what she does. Links and show notes for this episode are on moneyneversleeps.ie, so check us out online. Also, you can subscribe to our Money Never Sleeps newsletter at moneyneversleeps.substack.com. If you're enjoying Money Never Sleeps and want to see it continue, make sure you hop on over to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review. Remember, if you or a colleague need help attracting and retaining great talent for your fintech or financial services company, it is highly advisable that you build a relationship with a team at Top Tier Recruitment, as they really know their stuff. You can find them at toptierrecruitment.com. And don't forget Conan Brophy from Create Sound. He mixes and edits each episode for us and is an excellent media man to get in touch with when you're thinking about launching your own podcast. As for me, I help startups get their products to market, get customers, and finance their vision. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or at norioventures.com. And you can follow Owen Fitzgerald on Twitter at OwenFitzgerald9. Finally, till next time, thanks for listening. See ya.
Money never sleeps, pal.